1822MX. So this is the first and probably the only time I'll cover an 1822 series of the 18XX. Just to give you a right off the bat, it's not going to be among my favorites, and the main reason for that is that I guess I found a few things. One, it's so overblown in terms of the amount of smaller decision making. Not the tiny stuff like a track lay here and there, but the complexity of all the different decisions you have to make, the bidding system in it and everything, just made it a game that I think is much more prone to analysis paralysis issues over pretty minor stuff when it comes down to it, or what seems like minor stuff, but can actually have a pretty big effect in the long term. And beyond that, I couldn't find a tremendous strategic choice that you had to make in the game. You're handed a randomized start and progression through the game in terms of what minor companies and what concessions and what privates are going to show up in what order. I mean, they all show up, but in what order they show up. Which throws a fair amount of variability into it, which can be kind of cool, but it also means that you kind of have to assess the board for a significant amount, the game state, pre-game, for a significant amount of time after that setup is aligned. I think that's neat in terms of replayability and everything. It doesn't really provide a hell of a lot to me where I play each 18XX game nowadays a couple of times at most, right? So, if you were going to get hooked on the 1822 series, I think it's kind of cool that, like, if you played it to the exclusion of all other 18XXs, if you decide this is the type of XX that I want to play. I also found that it didn't have the kind of cutthroat economic manipulation that I like best in the 18XXs. That was what really kind of blew me away with 1830 and everything of its ilk. I rather like, and everything that's outside of that, I don't necessarily dislike. And in fact, I liked 18 New England, also by the same designer with some of the same principles in play, but a much more cut down and streamlined game. I think what really got me with this one was the amount of calculation and minor decisions that had to be made versus a real lack of any huge strategic choices. There's one way to win this game, and after you play it once, you kind of see that. At least that's my take on it. All right. Let's start with components, then we'll go into a little bit more detail. It's an all-aboard production, always top-notch. They do a great job on components for the most part. I'll hit on a couple of things as we go. The board uses small hexes. I like small hexes. I like the idea that the board takes up less space than it would with the big hexes and whatnot. I always think that a game's footprint should be at the level, at a level where it's like, yeah, this is as small as I could make this game without making it kind of painful. I'm almost never in the mood for make the game bigger. Sure, the early 18XXs came out with big hexes, so that's kind of a standard. So you get used to it, but you get to put a lot more board and a lot more pieces in if you use smaller pieces. Now I'm going to complain about a lot of the components, but that doesn't mean, again, All Aboard did a really great job in production. And there's a lot in this game. You've got a shit ton of minor companies, each of which has its own manifest or whatever. I don't know what they're called. You got a reasonable number of majors, and again, pretty good. They have a lot of player aid information printed on them. That's a great idea, and I think more of the games need that. To make a little bit more space, you need a bank pool thing, and then a bidding thing for concessions. The bidding for the minor companies and the privates is on the board as part of it. The game has a flat stock track. It can get a little confusing because the minors run before the majors and the national runs after everything else, and they're all tracked on the same chart and can get kind of mixed up, and I got myself into a couple of problems for that. Cards, modern day cards are fantastic. And you've got a fairly large number of them because there's a huge number of minors, so the minors each have a certificate in addition to their placard, whatever, that holds their cash and trains, which is a little different from everything else. Is it necessary? Well, kind of, because each of the minor certificates flips over and turns into a copy, a certificate in the NDEM. Tiny, tiny little hexes for the board, to go on the board for your track lays. I've already talked about, hey, I like the effect on the board, but they are a little harder to manipulate, but again, very thick stock, very good quality. One thing about them, it uses what's called the Lawson design, the regular, I guess if you're going to call the other type curvilinear, this would be rectilinear track. It comes with angles. It causes an issue for me in that it opens the track up way more than the more traditional curvilinear track does, or I'll just call it curve track and angular track. The curve track presents a lot more difficult terrain for you to build your routes over. Just in terms of the track terrain, right? The topography of the graph that you're allowed to travel on. Which means that you have a whole lot of different options for turnings and all kind of stuff like that open up the board, make it very difficult to close off parts of the board. It makes for big runs. I remember this being a real problem in 18OE, which has, a huge map with tons of this, and you can basically, get across the board in it. Now, it kind of is necessary for that because of certain certain aspects of the game, and maybe it's important in this as well. But it's a headache and adds to those little decisions that you have to make that require a lot of calculation, a lot of mental effort, without really gaining you much. So I've always kind of not been thrilled with those. Okay, little wooden cubes. You share these. These are going to be used for your player. Each player has their own color that they can bid with. There's more colors than you need, though, and they're kind of at random and whatnot. That's going to allow you to bid on... There's a whole bunch of things you can bid on, and you bid on them throughout the game. there's minor corporations or minor companies, private companies, and then concessions. And concessions are essentially just an income maker that gives you the claim to start one of the major corporations. And it's the only way you can start a major corporation. Early in the game, I did not see in my play any corporation started any other way, because by the time you could start those other corporations, players had arranged things in such a way. There's a very low certificate limit in this game, which is kind of annoying, given the amount of different things you can hold that count against the cert limit. And there just wasn't room for any players to start one of the other major corporations. It wasn't worth it. And then there's also the fact that the established companies, the way they suck up the miners and take them in, ends up giving players a huge holding in any corporation that they own, which means that there's just not room with that tight stock certificate limit to start one of the major corporations. Now, it's possible that in three or maybe even likely that in 3 or 4 players, you might start major corporations without using the concession to do it after the period of the concessions. You have wooden pieces for all the miners, and for the NDM here, these are station tokens as well as valuation. The miners have a valuation which goes up each time, which is different from most XX. And then for the majors as well. Again, top-notch pieces, but I'm not really in favor of the wooden pieces that All Aboard prefers. And the reason why, and GMT for that matter, the reason why is that it's easier to handle the stock market with regular counters, and the tall cylinders on the board, they're not all that tall, but they're tall enough that you could knock one over, it rolls around, it can cause all kind of confusion that just doesn't happen. I'm not sure it would be possible to use tokens easily, though. I mean, I guess with tweezers you could pull them in and out. I'd feel really bad using tweezers in an 18xx game, but you might actually want it here just because of the tightness that the small tiles create. They actually, and the fact that the tiles can have more than 3 of those cylinders on them at once. The biggest city has 3 open spaces, but then there are destination tokens which can also end up in there. So you could end up with a very, very crowded tile where you can't see shit in it. The rule book, I guess it was okay. It's on glossy paper, which I don't like. It has this red text on blue, which I find almost unreadable. That is the differences from the 1822 core system here. I think that's a bad choice. I'm just finding it very, very difficult to read. You have to get the lighting in your glasses positioned just right to be able to cope with it. And yeah, and add to that the glare of the glossy pages and whatnot. And that ended up being kind of an issue. There might be a couple of places in the rules where things aren't maybe as clear as they need be. There is a little, there are a couple of nice aspects to this. There's a little cheat area that tells you about easy to miss rolls, and that hits some of the things that maybe aren't called out as well as they should be elsewhere. Also just catches some stuff. And it's got an index, which is a big deal. Also has, you know, what do we got here? The company tables. That's just to show you how many companies there are in here. This is all the miners. There are just a ridiculous number of them. And then this is all the privates. And it's beginning to feel like you've got something the size of 18OE here. And it's part of the burden. is that you have to be aware of all the different special effects for so many different private companies. Again, I'm used to, I don't know, maybe 8 privates or something like that as kind of the limit. And here we've got 18 different privates. Some of them do the same thing as another one. So you've got a couple that are duplicates, but I'm guessing you have at least 12 different special rules, and some of them are fairly significant special rules for them that you can see. Including these bonus trains that last forever and don't count against train limit, but just add to your money. It adds to the burden of not just memorizing all that stuff, but of calculating what the valuation is of each of these special abilities, right? It's kind of hard to tell. And some of them turned out to be really, really worthwhile. Some of them turn out to be really, really worthwhile under certain circumstances. So for example, the Pullman car. It allows you to turn your train into a plus train, which can hit doinkers, collects the income for them, but doesn't count them. Or to turn one of your trains into one. Which, if you happen to be in certain areas of the board, could be really, really important, and otherwise not. So you've got a lot of these kind of balancing features. I don't mind the balancing aspect of it, but I do mind the amount of times that you have to calculate. Every time you look at a miner, you have to think about, how much is that worth to me, and how much am I going to make out of it over the length of the game? Each of the miners also comes with, or each of the privates. I'm sorry, I'm talking about the privates here with the specials. Each of the privates comes with its own income, which also factors into it, so you kind of know a baseline of what they're worth. You know that it's worth at least how much it's going to pay you that round, probably, unless you need the money for something else, and probably for a couple of rounds, whatever. Now for the bidding, I kind of hid this. Let's pull it out. Each of the bidding charts comes with one of these kind of things. For concessions and for minor companies, the bidding starts at $100. You can't bid less than that for them. And the first concession is always set to sort of the most powerful thing in the game, which is, I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically comes out of Mexico City and comes as a duel with a miner that is right near it, that it really needs in order to operate. Like when you open the major company, it's going to need that miner in order to operate at all effectively. It is far and away the most powerful of the things that you could have. You could still bid just $100 on it, but it should not go that low. It probably is worth over the 200 that the two components add up to. The designer suggests, I think, 225 or 235 as sort of the lowest bid it should go for. And otherwise, it kind of depends on what else is out there, how valuable other things are. I ended up letting it be bought for, I think, around 180 or something like that. And the guy who got it won, which shouldn't be surprising. The way the bidding works is it's incorporated into your standard stock rounds. We're going to need to swap batteries. We'll be back. Each player has 4 bidding cubes that they can use. Once they commit to a bidding cube in a stock round, they can't withdraw it even if they're overbid or anything like that. And you're allowed to play up to 3 of them in any particular action, in any particular stock turn, in any time that you take a stock turn. That can be your purchase action, essentially, is to play with the bids of up to 3 companies. And you can place one of your cubes on a company, committing it. You're not going to use that cube for anything else that stock round. You could raise a bid that you've already got. And I guess that's it. if you get, if you have the highest bid, the money that you've got bid and the certificate limit have to be available to have bought that, to buy that thing. But if you get overbid, your cube is still going to remain there, but you're you're freed up of any money or certificate restrictions as to whether or not you can you can buy something else or bid on something else based on that aspect. At the same time, as you're bidding, you're allowed to buy stock shares. Now there aren't really many available in the in the first part of the game. There are, I think, one miner gets destroyed at the beginning of the game. So there's 4 shares of the National Railway, which is a special thing. It operates kind of like a receivership. I don't know how to put it. It operates different from anything I've seen before. But basically it is a source of revenue and its stock value can go up. There is one place in the rules that I'm kind of iffy about, which is that when it gets privatized, apparently it just like stays out there in terms of the stocks stay out there and they just start losing money because it's not allowed to run trains or anything, which is, to me, kind of fucked up, but whatever. That's my reading of the rules. Maybe I missed something, or maybe some sort of errata has come out on it or something. But yeah, that's the net effect right now by my reading. Early on, it's a fairly decent revenue generator because your private companies are going to pretty much generate a maximum of $10 per. And your concessions generate $10 per into your pocket. All these things count against your cert limit. In the 5-player game, you have a cert limit of 10, which doesn't hit you until the mid-game, but at the mid-game, you start running up against it, and it becomes problematic. Now, I actually quit the game for a couple of reasons. One, it was obvious what everybody's position was going to be at the end of the game at the point that I quit. There were not going to be any surprises. 2, it takes a long time to calculate the runs because of the angular tracks, because of the number of trains that the different companies have. So I don't usually quit an 18XX. I usually play them out to the bitter end, even ones that I'm not that thrilled about, like 1870 and 2038 due to their length. But yeah, I was just finding that, look, for me to play it correctly, it's going to take me a fair amount of effort to go through that last operating round, and there was absolutely no reason. And certainly in any opposed game, I would expect it to have ended at that point. There was just no chance. First place was guaranteed, second place was guaranteed, etc., all down the line. There was just no place for anybody to get any kind of movement. That probably wouldn't be the case most times with experienced players, but everybody kind of was stuck in a rut, and there was nothing you could do about it towards the end of the game. Part of it is because there's no way you could token someone out and screw their run over, because there's just too many opportunities for breaking through, and almost all of them had been taken. So everybody was running pretty good track for what they had train-wise. Trying to think of where I am. Yeah. So Later in the game, you can convert a concession into a major corporation. You could do that right away. It doesn't really do you a lot of good. You end up having to pay more money to float the extra share, and it's not going to produce a lot of cash for you. The miners are the way to get a lot of money in this game. The privates are not a bad investment if you can get them cheaply, because they produce 10 bucks a round, and if other people have committed their money to miners, you might be able to get a couple of privates that produce as well as the miners do, as some of the crappier miners do, really early in the game. And they may also be of some importance to you later in the game. And then they may also set you up in a situation where you have more cash for the next set of miners, because each turn a new packet basically kind of shows up, filling in the spaces that are used up by the other players. The other thing is, each turn, at least one miner has to be sold. If no miner is sold, well, at least one is going to go away. If the miner in the first position isn't sold, it converts into National Railway. And if that one's kind of crappy, that's fine. It gets rid of it and creates a new space that new ones come out. What I found was the players wanted miners really, really badly, because in 18XX, one of the perceived understandings is that miner companies make you a lot of money, and they're worth having. You're going to split the money 50-50. In this one, they make you even more because they go up in stock value, although you can't just sell them. But your corporations can buy them, and they do have stock value at the end of the game if you hold them the whole game. Well, that preconception is correct in as far as it goes, except that you don't want as many miners as you possibly can get. If you have too many miners, you're going to get hit by the train rush. And the train rush in this one is brutal. It doesn't feel like there's any kind of train rush for a long time, and then it hits at once. Because there's local trains which only can hit one regular city and one town, perhaps. They don't have to hit the town, though. That really the miners start out with. And they don't make a lot of money off them, which is why the privates might not be a bad buy at a much lower price. But the miners can eventually upgrade into 2 trains. They can upgrade the local to a 2 train, and they can also buy real trains, and they can last the course of the game. The privates can also last the course of the game, which is problematic because you have to figure out a way to get rid of them. Now, unlike most XXs, you can't sell them to your corporations, but you can give them to your corporations. So, yeah. And this is where some of the pre-planning stuff gets into play, which is during the play of the game, you can give your privates to your corporations. Well, that's something where you have to make a decision, say in the second operating round, do I need to free up space for my certificate limit? Now, this is something that also happens in other XXs, but you don't have like 18 privates in the game. So, you're sitting on very few, and you usually want the cash from the privates. Here, you don't get the cash from the privates. So you're like looking at, well, what future opportunity am I giving up? What's the opportunity cost for giving up the miner now? Do I want to have more flexibility as to where I put it? And especially on that first playthrough, you may not know that you're probably only going to have one corporation, at least in 5 players. You may not know that having 3 miners is a bad idea because they make lots of money. There's a lot of those kind of preconceptions, and that's the I'm going to call it the obfuscation level of the game, which is that there's a lot of preconceptions that you bring in from 18xx that don't really apply. And they're a layer of maybe you could figure it out before the game, but for me at least, you have to play a game of it, maybe two, whatever, and then you see these things. And similarly is how you win the game, right? Well, you get the most money, yeah. But the way you actually win this thing is going to be getting yourself a massive permanent train and a massive E-train or express train. The express train is able to run over the same track as the other train, so you're basically able to produce tremendous amounts of income. I saw runs in the ridiculous level. I mean, the absolutely ridiculous level. Most games, a $100 run is a big deal. Here, I think I was hitting in the 140s. Okay, yeah. And obviously, that has to do with you're allowed to have a permanent train, which could be quite good. It could have a Pullman car, which allows it to be a plus train, which could be very, very valuable. You're allowed to have the E-train, which hits all your tokens and then doubles the value of them. It hits all your tokens if it can build a route through it, but that's not hard to do. And finally, you can have a special train, which doesn't add a hell of a lot. It might be like an L train that lasts to the end of the game, or a 2 train that lasts to the end of the game. And basically, I'd say that adds about, $100, about $10 a share to your run. So that's not going to be a huge thing. Those tend to be really, really powerful earlier in the game when they're on board a miner or something, helping the miner get to the next train level pretty easily. Some of those don't produce an income. So they seem like they come on the other side of a private, like many of the privates. Basically, the private has two sides. One side is for the player control, which just gives you the income that it makes, and one side is when a corporation has it, which gives it its special abilities. Well, some of the special abilities are special train. And those special trains, a lot of them don't give you any income at all. And what that means is, when you're looking at it for the first time, you're like, I don't know how much this is going to really be worth. I can run an extra $2, an extra $20. That's 10 and 10 through the miner. Sure, it might be okay. Well, they end up, over the course of the game, being worth a hell of a lot of money, but only when used in conjunction with a company. So you have to have a company, and preferably with most of them, preferably one that hits Mexico City. Although, honestly, maybe not, because other than the L train, all of them run over track, so you have to kind of find a secondary place to hit Mexico City, which isn't hard. The way Mexico City's set, you could probably hit it with another train from a different angle. Okay. There's other things, like, which I didn't do at all, like stock redemption and reissuing. We saw this in the 18 New England, where, again, it puts a burden on you by not allowing you to just reissue the shares and get the cash right away and buy a train, which means you have to do a little bit more pre-planning, a little bit more calculation each fucking turn to see, well, it's hard enough to do the calculation, right, in most XXs of, can I buy a train now if I swallow whatnot? But in this one, like in 18 New England, you have to decide, can I buy a train on my next operating round without knowing everything that's going on? And I have to reissue the stocks then. Worse than that, here the reissue actually affects the stock price, which I'll say is reasonable because you're watering down the stocks. But the redemption doesn't affect the stock's price, and it doesn't even count as fully sold out if you redeem shares, which is kind of fucked up. You have multiple forms of capitalization in this, much like 1856. You have 3 different types of capitalization. I only saw one, which was the complete partial capitalization that comes from opening up a concession. You just flip it over, you pay some money because you bought the concession conceptually for only $100. Its worth is basically $100. Well, if you set the price higher, you have to pay the difference. You have no mergers in this one. You only create through that. Yeah. A little later in the game, when the 5 trains come out, the concessions go away. So if anybody's holding one and hasn't started their company, they lose out on it. And people can float a corporation much as they can in 1856. They have to buy 50% of it, but it's partial cap. But then once the 6th train comes out, they still have to only buy 50%, but it's full cap. So, you buy your 50%, you get 100% of the money that the company will ever get. I don't know why I don't know why it's doing that 2 different mechanisms for floating a corporation through more normal means. I didn't see it happen though, because everybody floated through their concessions. They wanted their corporations early to, save miners basically. If not save them, absorb them. Because the nice thing about that is the corporations are able to take over a miner, and that can get you out of a situation where you'd be responsible for a train. You are responsible for trains on miners and majors, and you don't have a way out of the game. There's no bankruptcy in this game. You're now heavily in debt. Can't win the game, have a huge negative, you'll accumulate 50% interest on that debt every stock round, and it's just going to send you into hell. Keeps the game from ending under weird conditions. Peterson seems to not like that. I've seen a couple of his games at least, that have that kind of situation to prevent the game ending due to a player bankruptcy. So the game becomes more predictable as to how it works. Another weirdness that adds to the burden to the player is all those special trains. So you're allowed to pay out, swallow, or half swallow in this game. Already giving you another lever to play with, more choices, more amounts of money. But what's worse is, with your special train, if you have one, you're allowed to make the choice separately from your main train. And it's kind of weird, because you could be required to buy a train because you don't have a real train on your corporation, but you have a special train, and you still are allowed to make a run and produce income and maybe send your stock price out. I think I haven't gone over all the different levers that you can play with, but when you're trying to figure out, can I buy a train, can I buy a miner company, because you have to pay money to yourself to get the miner, can I afford track lays, can I afford this token here, whatever. All your expenditure choices, you have this humongous panoply of different ways to generate revenue into your company. And it's not just I'll be able to make that up, right? And some of them you have to figure turns in advance. So it becomes really, really problematic, in my view, to be able to just make a decision. Each of those decisions becomes an analysis paralysis problem from hell, and you're regularly making them for every company that you run, even the miners. Even though you have no payout options or anything on the miners, you do have to calculate out what you're going to make and everything on them, and whether or not to shift a train and stuff like that, because a strategic little shift might end up getting you the position that you need. I would say the majors are much more difficult to deal with. And what I saw was players didn't have many majors. No one had more than one. You do have the opportunity to keep a minor in the game for the whole game. And it's kind of nice because it can make quite a bit of money for that one share, that one certificate that you're being charged against. The privates, you probably want to get rid of them before you get into the end game. And everybody eventually did, but I had some problems. Again, you have to time that, you have to pre-plan it and all that. And what that means is that you just have this huge burden of little decisions. Now, when I come to that, I'm like, okay, you have this huge burden of how to optimize, how you're going to cope with the train rush and everything, with all these little decisions, all these little levers you have to play with in many different ways. There's so many little things you can just fuck up and screw your existence over with. But what's missing is a big choice, as far as I can see, of strategic options. As far as I can see, the game runs down to you want a decent number of miners to produce a good income for you early in the game. You don't want to go over a certain limit of miners, and there's some variability in calculation in what that is at any given time, but this is your fundamental. You buy miners to do that, to give you your revenue. The privates, all kinds of little considerations go into, what the valuation should be on the private is. Some of that is of some definite interest. How much something's worth, but very, very difficult to assess on your first play, right? It might take several plays. Again, it's the obfuscation thing, right? And the fact that the fact that there is a limit, that you want them but you don't want too many, stuff like that, again, it's an obfuscation factor on top of whatever there already is for 18xx that kind of exists there anyhow. And then there's the big surprise at the end, which is that there's basically only one way to win, which is have a permanent train, have an E-train, have a good corporation that hits good locations, no big shock there, but the fact that you need a certain configuration of trains, you just do, and probably have one of the special trains on board as well, just to make sure that your route runs very well. That's going to give you, because you can go up double stock values in this one, that's going to give you a bonus there. The runs become so huge that you just outstrip anyone who's trying to play a more conservative strategy. There is one strategy for this game, one basic flow. I don't know. I don't know if there's another XX that I would say that about. 35 comes close. It's pretty fucking frozen, but it's actually frozen by what player order you sit in. Like, you're only allowed to bid on certain things at any given. You're only allowed to buy certain items at certain times, and it really locks in a certain style of play no matter what you do. But I'm trying to think about this, and I just keep coming to the idea that, there's not a lot of strategic choice in this. So what you've got is a whole lot of little annoying problems, and the way to win is not obvious when you first pick it up, but I think becomes so after a play or two. And that reminds me a lot of the modern Euros, right? The modern Euros, instead of so they throw a lot of complexity into the game, a lot of different crap that you can do and everything, so that you have a lot of little decisions. They end up obscuring the main line of thought that you want to make. And even if there is a big strategic decision or not, it is kind of obfuscated from you. And then as far as I can tell, most people play them a couple of times and then just like, yeah, I've gotten what I can get out of this, you know. Now that's kind of how I play things, but that's more because of the necessity, because of how many fucking games I have. But I feel like the modern Euro is driving something where it's like, who can figure out what the game is actually about first? And I don't think that's all there is here. I think there's quite a bit more because of the variable setup, and that you can make. It's sort of, so I guess if there is a strategic planning, it's in looking at the packets, which are overwhelming. Okay, I mean, look at the order that the minors and the privates come out to determine whether or not, to determine a pathway of, okay, I'd like to do this on the first bid that I'm allowed to make. I want these things, and that'll lead to these, and that'll lead to that. And I think that's actually where the strategic thinking comes in. So I'm kind of missing that, but it's an overwhelming fucking flow of information. And I kind of suspect it would be an overwhelming flow of information for anyone up until maybe, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 plays, maybe forever. Because what you really have to do is look at 24 minor companies, and judge their starting positions. 23, one of them is going to be pulled out. And one of them's fixed, so 22. And to a lesser extent, the privates, because I think there are certain ones that, you'll judge, yeah, I need this for this corporation, etc. And there you're looking at 18. The concessions, I think, are a dumb idea, like to buy early on. The players who bought them, you're paying $100 for a $10 a round thing. You could get a minor for that. You could buy some privates. You could save your cash and use them in the next stock round to try to leverage buying something more important. So yeah, I just think that the amount of little decisions, all those little levers you have to play with, those drive me crazy as an épée nightmare. And the strategic depth doesn't make up for the burden required to get to whatever might be there. Because all it's going to be is figuring out a clever pattern of rails. That's something I don't mind doing in some of the smaller things, like 1830, 1856. I really kind of like seeing, hey, what kind of synergy can I get here? But here you just have such a big mass. And the idea is the manifold is so complex that it's going to be difficult to find really clever choices and to lay them out in time properly. But again, that may be something that's very appealing to certain players. It just isn't. It isn't why I'm into 18xx. I'm mostly in it for the economic harsh manipulation, slapping stocks around, threatening somebody's ownership, etc. None of that happens in this. Some aspects of this feel a little bit like 35, but the main game is much more interesting. I was very up on it when I started playing it. It wasn't until I started realizing just how heavy a burden it was laying on me. I guess maybe in a way I would say the closest to it is 18OE, with its just massive manifold that you look at, and this manages it in a much smaller package. So I'm trying to get an idea of what kind of player likes 1822, because obviously it's popular enough that it is attractive to people, and not just to people who play it 3 times and say, okay, that was fun, I really liked that, now on to the next one. There are people who are going to be that are really, playing it regularly, again and again. I From what I read, this is not as strong a game as the original 1822. It's got a little bit too much chrome in it. Maybe it's for me it's all that many levers, but I feel like the core idea looks like it must have been there in 22. Maybe there's less privates. Maybe there's more of them that are similar or whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to touch another title in that series though, because again, to me the core is just not appealing. Ages 14 and up. Yeah. I can see it. I mean, I could see younger than 14 playing it, but that's the common, right? If I were a 14-year-old picking this up, trying to learn it on my own, man, without having played any 18xx's before, honestly, I just don't think they should say that. I just don't think they should put an age thing on it. Because, yeah, it's like, I don't know. I know I was blown away by 30, and, I was in my 20s at that point, and had played games my whole life. So, yeah. Overall, kind of disappointing. One of the things is, I wouldn't want to bring this to a player group, because the learning curve is so high. And I think probably where it shines best is either at tournaments, conventions, stuff like that, or in the online gaming community, where you're playing on, the platforms that allow you to play an 18xx game. And actually, a lot of the pain might go away playing it on an electronic version. You might be able to get I don't know how many features those have, but it would be kind of useful to be able to say, hey, on this turn, make these assumptions, tell me this. And I doubt that they have that much, but I suspect they at least give you hey, if I lay this track, what's my best run? Type of thing. At least while it's your turn, so that you can make those decisions a little bit easier. So it's going to ease a lot of that. And it's going to keep you from cheating, which I actually found to be a big deal. I found it, this one, I kept trying to cheat one way or another. And some of that has to do with the physical components and how they interact and cause me issues. For example, the stock value tokens, the fact that you're running the minors on the same stock track as you're running the majors. It just created a confusual visionary trackage. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a little disappointed. I was pretty high on it when I started playing it. I really was enjoying all those minors, all the what it seemed to spread out. But yeah, angular track, the amount of levers that you have to pull, a lack of the kind of cutthroat nature that I want to see in terms of the player-to-player interactions that happen. Dotting doesn't mean much. You're not raping companies. Just so much is just missing from what I really like most. Anyway, that's it. I hope I haven't run out of battery. Barely. Just perfect.